Have you ever read a Bible verse 100 times only to realize you've been misunderstanding the most important part of its promise? When your life completely shatters, people love to quote Psalm 46, telling you to just be still. Perhaps you have heard it whispered in a hospital waiting room while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Or maybe someone texted it to you the moment after your career suddenly collapsed. Be still and know that I am God. We are told to take a deep breath, to quiet our minds, to sit in peaceful silence and wait for the storm to pass. But what if being still doesn't mean what you think it means? What if we've completely misread the deepest promise God makes to us when the ground beneath our feet actually gives way? Look closely at the context of that famous psalm. The earth is giving way. The mountains are falling into the heart of the sea. The waters are roaring and foaming. The nations are in an absolute uproar. This is not a tranquil garden. This is a war zone. This is a Category 5 hurricane of the soul. In the original Hebrew, the command to be still is the word *rapha. It does not mean to sit quietly in a comfortable chair. It means to let go. It means to drop your weapons. It means to release your frantic, white-knuckled grip on the illusion that you can control the outcome. Maybe you are standing in a season right now where the mountains are crumbling into the sea. You have tried to fix the relationship. You have tried to balance the bank account. You have tried to heal the illness. But the waves keep crashing over your head. You are exhausted from fighting. To truly understand this hidden truth of what it means to drop your weapons and trust Him, we have to look closely at a woman the modern church rarely talks about. She is known to us only as the Shunammite woman, found tucked away in the dusty, ancient pages of 2 Kings chapter 4. She was a woman of noble character, wealthy, hospitable, and deeply faithful to the Lord. She lived in Shunem, a village nestled in the fertile Jezreel Valley. Picture the sun-drenched fields of grain, the dry, hot winds sweeping across the stone houses. She had everything money could buy, yet she carried the quiet, heavy grief of a barren womb. In that culture, to be without a child was to carry a profound social and personal stigma. Yet, she did not grow bitter. She remained attentive to the things of God. She noticed the prophet Elisha passing through her town regularly. His clothes were likely covered in the thick dust of the road, his face weathered by the harsh elements as he traveled to minister to God's people. Out of pure reverence for God's servant, she went to her husband with a beautiful, selfless idea. She convinced him to build a small, walled room on their flat roof. Imagine the sound of the stonemasons at work, the smell of fresh mortar and cedar wood baking in the Middle Eastern sun. She didn't just build it, she furnished it with intentional care. She carried up a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp, just so the weary prophet would have a quiet, sacred place to rest whenever he passed through. She asked for nothing in return. Her service was an outpouring of a heart completely surrendered to God. Because of her extraordinary kindness, God moved through Elisha to grant her the one impossible thing she thought she would never have. One day, while resting in that cool upper room, Elisha wanted to bless her. He asked his servant, Gehazi, what could be done for her. Gehazi pointed out the undeniable void in her life. She had no son, and her husband was old. When Elisha called her to the doorway, he spoke a prophecy that must have felt like a cruel tease to a woman who had long ago buried her maternal hopes. He told her that by the following spring, she would hold a son in her arms. Her immediate response was a desperate plea for self-protection. No, my lord, please, man of God, do not deceive your servant. Perhaps you know exactly what that feels like. Maybe you have been disappointed so many times that you are terrified to hope again. You are terrified to believe that God might actually bring life to the dead places in your heart, because the pain of another letdown might finally break you. You would rather live with the quiet ache of a closed door than risk the agony of it being slammed in your face again. But God is faithful to His word. The following year, the cry of a newborn baby echoed off those stone walls. For years, she watched this miracle child grow, her heart overflowing with a love she had previously locked away. She watched him learn to walk, heard his laughter ringing through the courtyard, and felt the immense, terrifying vulnerability of loving someone so much. But then, tragedy struck without warning. It always does, doesn't it? One morning, her little boy was out in the sun-baked harvest fields with his father. The heat of the day was rising, the golden stalks of grain swaying in the warm breeze. Suddenly, the boy cried out, clutching his head in absolute agony. "My head! My head!" he screamed. His father, likely confused and distracted by the harvest, simply told a servant to carry the boy to his mother. He was hurriedly carried home. Imagine the terror gripping the Shunammite woman's chest as she saw the servant running toward the house, her precious miracle child limp in his arms. For agonizing hours, this desperate mother sat in the dim light of her home, holding her son on her lap. Feel the weight of his small body against hers. Feel the frantic beating of her heart as she wiped the sweat from his brow, begging God to intervene, whispering words of comfort into his ear. She held him until noon. And then the unthinkable happened. The breath left his lungs. His body went still. The child of promise was dead. When the ground beneath your feet gives way, what is your first reaction? For many of us, it is to scream, to panic, to call everyone we know, to descend into absolute despair. But watch what this woman does. She embodies the true, rugged meaning of asterisk Rapha, of letting go and trusting God in the darkest valley. She does not wail in the streets. She does not even tell her husband that the boy has died. Instead, she carries her lifeless son up the stairs to the prophet's room. She lays his still, cold body on the bed of the man of God. She walks out, and she shuts the door behind her. She shut the door on the tragedy, not to live in denial, but to lock her faith inside the room of God's promise. She immediately calls to her husband, asking for a servant and a donkey, telling him she must go to the man of God at once. Her husband, confused, asks why she is going today, as it is neither a new moon nor a Sabbath. Her response is one of the most powerful declarations of faith in all of Scripture. She simply says, "It is all right." In the original Hebrew, she says one word, shalom, peace. How could she say shalom with her only son lying dead on a bed upstairs? Because her peace was not tethered to her circumstances. Her peace was tethered to the character of the God who gave her the child in the first place. Perhaps you are staring at a dead promise today. Maybe a marriage you thought God put together is falling apart. Maybe a ministry you poured your soul into is crumbling. Maybe a physical healing you prayed for hasn't come, and you are holding the ashes of a dream that was supposed to be a miracle. You are being invited into the faith of the Shunammite woman. She saddled the donkey and gave her servant a strict command. "Lead on. Do not slow down for me unless I tell you." She rode with fierce, unyielding determination across the dusty expanse toward Mount Carmel, where Elisha was. The journey was nearly 20 miles. 20 miles of bouncing on the back of a donkey, her heart shattered, her arms empty, her mind racing. Yet, she refused to let go of God. When Elisha saw her coming from a distance, he sent Gehazi to run and meet her, to ask if she, her husband, and the child were all right. Again, she answered, "Everything is all right." She refused to settle for the servant. She needed the master. She bypassed the middleman and went straight to the source of the promise. When she reached the man of God at the mountain, she threw herself to the dusty ground and took hold of his feet. Gehazi stepped forward to push her away, perhaps offended by her breach of cultural protocol. But Elisha stopped him. "Leave her alone," Elisha commanded. "She is in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why." It was only then, at the feet of the prophet, that her grief poured out. She didn't ask for a resurrection. She simply poured out her broken heart. "Did I ask you for a son, my Lord?" she cried. "Didn't I tell you? Don't raise my hopes." Elisha immediately sprang into action. He sent Gehazi ahead with his staff, but the mother refused to leave Elisha's side. "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you," she declared. She knew that a piece of wood would not save her son. She needed the presence of God that rested upon the prophet. Elisha followed her back to Shunem. When he arrived, he went up to the roof. He walked into the room, and there was the boy, lying dead on his bed. Elisha went in, shut the door on the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. Then, the biblical narrative gives us a stunning, deeply physical picture of intercession. Elisha got on the bed and lay flat upon the boy, placing his mouth on the boy's mouth, his eyes on the boy's eyes, his hands on the boy's hands. As he stretched himself out over him, the boy's cold flesh began to grow warm. Elisha got up, paced back and forth in the room, and then stretched himself out on the boy once more. Suddenly, the silence of the room was broken. The boy sneezed once, twice, 7 times. And then, the child opened his eyes. Elisha called for the Shunammite woman. When she walked into the room and saw her boy alive, she didn't rush immediately to grab him. Before she embraced her resurrected son, she fell at Elisha's feet, bowing to the ground in absolute reverence and awe of God. Then, she took her son and went out. This brings us all the way back to Psalm 46. "Be still and know that I am God." The Shunammite woman didn't sit passively in a rocking chair while her world burned down. Being still did not mean doing nothing. Being still meant dropping her weapons of human control. It meant refusing to surrender to panic. It meant saddling a donkey and riding as fast as she could into the presence of God, refusing to let go of his feet until he moved. Maybe you have been trying to fix your shattered life with your own strength. You have been running to everyone else, trying to find a solution, exhausting yourself in the process. God is inviting you today to shut the door on the panic. Lay your dead dreams, your broken heart, and your deepest fears on his altar. Stop fighting the waves yourself. To be still is to look at the lifeless circumstances in your world, saddle up your faith, and say, "It is well." It is to fall at the feet of Jesus and refuse to leave his side. You may not understand why the tragedy struck. You may not understand why the promise seems broken. But you can know, with absolute certainty, that the God who gave the promise is still good, he is still sovereign, and he is intimately acquainted with your bitter distress. Drop your weapons today. Release your grip. The mountains may be falling into the sea, but the Lord Almighty is with you. Let go and know that he is God.